Well, let's cross then to Beijing. We're going to speak to our correspondent, Charles Pellegrin, who joins us from there. So, Charles, why then has China accepted this US invitation to cooperate on climate when the two countries are really at odds on most other issues?
That's right. The fight against climate change, one of the rare possible areas of cooperation between Washington and Beijing, as we saw last week when John Kerry, Joe Biden's climate czar, traveled to Shanghai to meet his Chinese counterpart, both of them issuing a joint statement saying that both countries should work towards the same goal with regards to climate change. Now, why is China taking part in this summit? I mean, climate change concerns the whole world. China is part of that world, so it makes sense for the Chinese government to take part, especially as the fight against climate change has been one of the key priorities of the government in Beijing for the past few years. Also important to note that since Xi Jinping's been to power, China has been a lot more sort of affirming itself on the world stage, a lot more presenting itself as a defender of multilateralism, as a responsible world leader and a member of the world community. So not participating to the summit would not really fit with that particular image. But the summit is not presented the same way here as it is in the United States, where there's a lot of talk of the United States returning to the negotiation table and leading those discussions. Here in China, it's more described as the bad student returning to the classroom. Those were the words that were used by the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Beijing, Hua Chunying, referring to the United States. So China will seek to really set the tone in these discussions, calling on developed countries to contribute more to reduction in emissions, but also to provide more assistance and help to developing countries in order for them to achieve sustainable development.
So, Charles, what are then China's targets in terms of carbon emissions reductions?
So in late 2020, Xi Jinping announced those targets, which are that China should be reaching a peak in carbon emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. These goals have been called ambitious but achievable by government officials. But amongst environmental activists and organizations like Greenpeace, which is present in China, more needs to be done. And they're waiting on this particular summit to see if there'll be more commitment. One of those would be to move forward the date of reaching peak emissions before 2030, but also changing the way that China calculates its emissions. Right now, these emissions targets are calculated as being intensity driven, so relative to the country's growth and economic development, not an absolute cap. So they're hoping to see a change in the way that's calculated, but also the one final big problem would be China's dependence on coal. So hopefully perhaps seeing some sort of moratorium on the use of coal and also stopping the financing of coal-powered plants overseas. This seems like a tall order. In 2021, China's consumption of coal is still expected to keep going up, especially as it is fueling China's post-COVID economic recovery.
Charles, thanks so much. Charles Pellegrin, correspondent, talking to us there from Beijing.